Hi, and welcome to Abuse, Neglect, Exploitation. We're going to be talking about that, and this is offered by the Florida Department of Children and Families. The course objectives are protecting vulnerable adults, reporting abuse, neglect, and exploitation, protective investigation, APS statistical overview, major adult protective services initiatives, interagency agreements, interagency training, and services for persons with disabilities, and as well as mandatory reporting. So the training goal is the overall goal for this training is to increase awareness of the mandatory reporting requirements, to provide an overview of Florida Adult Protective Services, and to improve communication between professionals and the Florida Abuse Hotline. Florida elders population, population by age category. So you can see the population under 60, 76%, 60 to 64, 6%, 65 to 74, 9.2%, 75 to 84 is 5.8, and 85 plus is 2.3%. Chapter 415 of the Florida Statutes, DCF, to investigate all reports alleging abuse, neglect, or exploitation of vulnerable adults. Purpose of the investigation is to determine if an alleged victim has been abused, neglected, or exploited, and to determine if assistance is necessary to protect the victim's health and safety. Disability status. Population 65 years or over is 3.2 million, almost 3.3 million. With a disability is 1.3. With a hearing difficulty is 467,000. With a vision difficulty is 213,000. With cognitive difficulty is 300,000. Ambulatory difficulty is 735,000. Self-care difficulty is 272,000. And with independent living difficulty is 483,000. Vulnerable adult means a person age 18 or older whose ability to perform the normal activities of daily living and or to provide his or her own care or protection is impaired due to a mental, emotional, sensory, long-term physical or developmental disability or dysfunction or brain damage or due to infirmities of aging. What is a caregiver? A caregiver means a person who has been entrusted or has assumed the responsibility for frequent and regular care of or services to a vulnerable adult on a temporary or permanent basis, and who has a commitment, agreement, or understanding with that person or that person's guardian that a caregiver role exists. Overview of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Abuse, neglect, and exploitation are complex and often hidden problems. The Department of Children and Families, or DCF, investigates and corrects abuse, neglect, and exploitation through the reports taken by the Florida Abuse Hotline. The Florida Abuse Hotline is 1-800-96-ABUSE. Everyone has a responsibility to make a report when abuse, neglect, or exploitation is suspected. Abuse. Abuse means any willful act or threatened act by a relative, caregiver, or household member which causes or is likely to cause significant impairment to a vulnerable adult's physical, mental, or emotional health. Abuse includes acts and omissions. Neglect means the failure or omission on the part of a caregiver or vulnerable adult to provide the care, supervision, and services necessary to maintain the physical and mental health of a vulnerable adult. Neglect also means the failure of a caregiver or vulnerable adult to make a reasonable effort to protect a vulnerable adult from abuse, neglect, or exploitation by others. Neglect is repeated conduct or a single incident of carelessness which produces or could reasonably be expected to result in serious physical or psychological injury or sustaining health risk of death. Neglect means the failure or omission on the part of a caregiver. Oh, excuse me. Vulnerable adult in need of services. Self-neglect. Vulnerable adult in need of services means a vulnerable adult who has been determined by a protective investigator to be suffering from the ill effects of neglect, not caused by a secondary party perpetrator, and is in need of protective services or other services to prevent further harm. What is exploitation? Exploitation means knowingly by deception or intimidation, obtaining or using or attempting to obtain or use the adult's funds, assets, or property with the intent to temporarily or permanently deprive the adult of the use, benefit, or possession of the funds, assets, or property for the benefit of someone other than the vulnerable adult. A person who exploits is a person who stands in a position of trust and confidence with the vulnerable adult. A person who knows or who should know that the vulnerable adult lacks the capacity to consent. A person who exploits is not always known by the victim. What does abuse, neglect, and exploitation look like, and what are the indicators? Who are the abusers? Abusers are often a family member, trusted friends, and caregivers, likely to have a history of mental or behavioral disorders, may be using or abusing alcohol or other substances, may have a poor financial situation or financial dependency, are often critical of others, and lack understanding about the needs of those whom they care for. Indicators of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Physical indicators: unexplained fractures, unexplained burns, unexplained lacerations, sexual abuse, other such emaciated, unusual lumps, protrusions, bald spots, scars, lack of clothing or same clothing, fleas or lice, unkept or dirty. Environmental indicators: in the home, with garbage thrown about inside and outside, hazardous living conditions due to lack of repairs, human or animal excrement, fire hazards, large numbers of animals lacking care. Food and clothing: little to no food, food is spoiled or lying around, insufficient clothing for the weather. Social deprivations: no evidence of social visits, television, radio, physically isolated from the community. Lack of friends, attempt by caregiver to isolate the individual from others. Financial indicators would be little or no money, activity in account not usual or age appropriate, power of attorney given when the individual is clearly incapable of making this decision, recent will change, lack of amenities. Indicators of abuse, neglect, and exploitation continued. Behavioral indicators of victim: destructive behavior of the victim, assaults others, destroy belongings, threatens harm or suicide, inappropriately displays rage in public, afraid of being alone, recent and sudden changes in behavior or attitude, suspicion of other people, shows symptom of withdrawal, severe hopelessness, constantly moves from place to place, frightened of a particular caregiver or caregiver, overly quiet, passive, timid, denial of problems. These may be some behavioral indicators of the victim. Behaviors of family members or caregivers, which would be indicators of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Family discord, striking, shoving, beating, name-calling, scapegoating, hostile, secretive, frustrated, shows little concern, poor self-control, blames adult, impatient, irresponsible, denial of problems, recent crises, inability to handle stress, recent loss of a spouse, withholds food or medication, isolates individuals from others in the household. They lack of physical, facial, eye contact with the individual. They change doctors frequently, past history of similar incidents, and unrealistic expectations of the individual. How does abuse happen? Family dynamics contribute to abuse, marital conflict, family discord or isolation from others, caregivers who feel forced to provide care, resentment or jealousy, too many people in a crowded home, financial problems or lack of financial expertise, medical issues, physical or cognitive limitations, adverse life events such as death of a spouse, partner, or a close friend, financial setbacks or change in the health status, inability to speak English, isolation or dependence, loneliness, fatigue, fear or trauma, or there's a family history of abuse. Protective investigation process. So this is the process for the Department of Children and Families. Commence investigation within 24 hours of receiving a report. Determine any indicators of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Assess safety and risk of further harm. Determine the need for services. And complete investigation within 60 days. The investigative process partnership. Partnerships to assist Florida's vulnerable adult population. The Department of Elder Affairs, the Agency for Persons with Disabilities, Advocacy Council for Persons with Disabilities, Agency for Healthcare Administration, Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program, the Office of Attorney General Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, the Department of Health, and law enforcement and state attorneys' offices. So all of these agencies could become involved. The Adult Protective Services budget is listed here, and we'll also post this PDF if you want to review it later. Okay, and it shows you how much staff they have and how many people in the investigative unit as well. So these are the number of reports received between 2005 and 2016. And as you can see, it's got a steady increase over time. In the last reported period of time, they had 52,000 reports, which was a 6.5% increase. The age of the victims in the reports, fiscal year 2016 to 2017, and you can see it's a pie chart. So the blue is 85 plus, the yellow is 75 to 84. The green is 65 to 74. The red are younger, 18 to 59, and then purple is 60 to 64. This is what they determine. So self-neglect was 19,000 cases, inadequate supervision 17,000, exploitation 11,000, physical injury 9, environmental hazards 6,500, mental injuries 6,300, medical neglect 4,700, sexual abuse 1,200, substance misuse 934, and you could see further down. Okay. Maltreatment frequencies with findings, institutional investigations. So these were the findings: inadequate supervision, and the blue is no indicator. The yellow is not substantiated, and red is verified. So the number of cases with regard to inadequate supervision, 4,000 were determined to have no indicator whatsoever that there was inadequate supervision. That's what the blue is. Yellow is it was not substantiated, and then red is verified cases of inadequate supervision. Personal injury, 124 verified cases, and so on and so forth. These are the same, continued on. These are in-home, and these are institutional, sorry. So these are in-home. Who are the abusers? Relationship of the perpetrator to the victim in the verified report. So remember the reports that were read. See how many of them are the son or the daughter, 42%. Other relatives, so family, spouse, family, other, mother, sibling, neighbor, friend, significant other, unknown. So institution employees, 1.8%, which is great, but we want to make sure that stays low. Home health care, very low, and so on and so forth. Those are the verified reports. Those are the in-home ones, though. Let's take a look at the institutional. So it's reversed. So the institutional employee, it is 74% of the reports. Okay, so family is much less. And this is where you're going to be concerned with abuse, neglect, and exploitation. 78% of the time where it's been verified, it was an institution employee, or 13% of the time, the institution facility owner operator. Services for persons with disabilities, home care for the disabled. Okay, those are programs. So they provide services for 1,100 Floridians, 546 individuals on the wait list, and these are just some of the statistics. You can review it in the document. So reporting abuse, neglect, and exploitation, mandatory reporting required by law in Florida statutes. Any person who has a reasonable cause to believe that a vulnerable adult is being abused, neglected, or exploited. So you have a mandatory reporting requirement if you suspect that. A person who knowingly and willfully fails to report a case of known or suspected abuse, neglect, or exploitation of a vulnerable adult, or who knowingly and willfully prevents another person from doing so, commits a misdemeanor of the second degree, punishable as provided in these sections. The Florida Abuse Hotline, which we mentioned previously, is 1-800-96-ABUSE. It's a 24-hour toll-free statewide hotline. Online reporting, you can also go to reportabuse.dcf.state.fl.us. And those are the number of accepted reports alleging abuse during that time period. So mandatory reporters, any person, including but not limited to a physician, and you can go ahead and read through this, but as you can see, it says health professionals, hospital personnel, nurses, medical emergencies, medical examiners, nursing home staff, assisted living staff, adult daycare center staff, adult family care home staff, social workers, state, county, municipal, criminal justice employee, law enforcement officers, employees of the Department of Business and Professional Regulation who are doing inspections, long-term care ombudsmen, banks, savings and loans. Like a lot of people are required mandatory reporting, okay, for suspected abuse, neglect, and exploitation. What to report? So what you'll report is you would report the name, age, race, sex, physical, mental, or behavioral description or infirmity, and location of each victim alleged to have been abused, neglected, or exploited. The name, addresses, and telephone numbers of the victim's family members, name, address, and telephone number of each alleged perpetrator and the relationship, name, address, and telephone number of the caregiver of the victim, if different from the alleged perpetrator, name, address, telephone number of the person reporting the alleged abuse, neglect, and exploitation, description of the physical or psychological injuries sustained, a description of the abuse, neglect, and exploitation, including any signs of harm or injury, any actions that you have taken by the reporter, if any, such as notification of the criminal justice agency, and any other information available to the reporting person which may establish the cause of abuse, neglect, and exploitation that occurred or is occurring. So these are the things that you need to be aware of when you are going to report some abuse, neglect, or exploitation. Reporting, these are some of the barriers to reporting. Victims often find it difficult to file a report for themselves due to the guilt, pride, or shame, or fear. Recognizing the signs and symptoms of abuse, neglect, and exploitations is often not easy. And the lack of knowledge of mandatory reporting requirements inhibits reporting as well. How can you help? You can learn effective interviewing techniques. So when you're talking to somebody who you suspect of being abused, exploited, or neglected, if the victim is in danger of immediate harm, call 911 or call local law enforcement. Learn about local support groups, counseling, or other available services in your area to which the victim can be referred to. And when in doubt about the situation, make the call and let the hotline experts decide if investigation is needed. Assisting adult protective investigations. How can you help? Provide specific information as it is essential to provide accurate demographics and the locations of the subjects of a report. Provide collateral sources and contact information. Who can support or provide essential information regarding the allegations? How can the investigators contact them? So these are all things that you're going to need to figure out how you can help. Okay. Provide accurate contact information. It is essential that the adult protective investigator contact you to ensure accuracy of the report as well as any other additional details. Provide as many details as possible. Think about the 5 W's, the who, what, where, when, why. So if you disagree with the counselor's decision not to accept the report, ask to speak to a supervisor or a manager. Okay, so if you call in and they say we don't think that's abuse, you can ask to speak to a supervisor or manager. So where to report? Now we talked about this before. We're going to mention it again. There'll be a couple quiz questions for you in the exams. You can call the telephone number, which is 1-800-96-ABUSE, 1-800-96-22873, 1-800-962-2873, or 1-800-96-ABUSE. Always phone in information concerning emergency or critical situations. So that's the fastest way to report. You can also fax a report, or you can do online reporting. Okay, there's the fax number and there's the online reporting website. Department of Children and Families has a direct number as well, which is 850-488-2881. And I appreciate you watching this presentation. And if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to us, supported by LF Training, or also you can call us by clicking on the link.